Roughly half of Australian workers are living paycheck to paycheck in 2026. In one of the wealthiest countries on the planet, one out of every two people you pass on the street is one bad month away from serious financial trouble. Most of them are working hard, earning a decent wage, and doing what they were always told would set them up for life. They are showing up every day, paying their bills on time, putting a bit aside when they can, and still feeling like the finish line keeps moving further away. What makes this even harder to swallow is that wages in Australia have actually gone up over the last decade. The average full-time worker now earns just under $100,000 a year before tax. On paper, that should be enough to live comfortably almost anywhere. In practice, rent, groceries, insurance, and energy bills have swallowed most of those gains, and what is left over often has nowhere useful to go. The reason usually comes back to one thing that nobody bothered to teach them in school, at home, or at work. That one thing is a basic understanding of how markets actually work in this country, and going without it is costing them more every single year than most people would ever believe. And if you want to start understanding how markets work without a huge upfront commitment, today's sponsor, MyTrade, is worth a look. MyTrade is an award-winning ASIC-regulated CFD platform founded in Melbourne, giving you access to over 1,100 instruments. They've just launched a GPT-powered feature that summarizes market trends and news from the past 24 hours, so you can stay across what's moving and why. And for Aussie users, you can start with as little as $20, which makes it one of the lowest entry points for any trading platform in Australia. Links in the description and pinned in the comments. Thanks again to MyTrade for sponsoring today's video. Now, the S&P ASX 200, which is basically the top 200 companies listed on the Australian share market, has returned around 8% a year on average over the long run when you include dividends. Compare that to a high interest savings account, which in 2026 is paying somewhere around 4 to 5% before tax, and often less than that once inflation takes its share. On paper, the gap between those two numbers looks small. In real life, the gap is huge, and the reason is compounding. If you put $10,000 into a savings account earning 4%, after 30 years you end up with around $32,000. If you take that same $10,000 and put it into a broad Australian share index earning around 8%, after 30 years you have just over $100,000. Add regular contributions on top, and the numbers get big enough to change what your retirement looks like, what you can pass on to your kids, and whether your 60s are spent worrying about bills or actually enjoying the life you built. Now think about how many Australians have their long-term savings sitting in cash right now because they are nervous about a market they were never taught to understand. The Australian Bureau of Statistics puts the household savings ratio at around 6.2% as of March 2026. That money has to live somewhere, and for a huge number of people, it lives in an account that feels safe but is losing value against inflation year after year. That is the first hidden cost. You feel like you are being careful, when really the balance is drifting backwards. Inflation in Australia has averaged between 2 and 3% over the long term, and it has been higher than that for most of the last few years. When your savings earn 4% before tax and inflation eats 3%, and the tax office takes another slice, the real return on that money can end up close to zero. The second hidden cost lives inside your super. Every working Australian has a superannuation account, and every fortnight your employer drops money into it. Most people set it up on their first day of work, tick whatever default option pops up, and never look at it again. Meanwhile, the median growth super fund returned around 10.5% in the last financial year, and balanced options have averaged over 8% a year across the long term. If your super is sitting in a conservative option because of a market dip, or because no option was ever actively chosen, the difference over a full working life can add up to hundreds of thousands of dollars by the time you retire. Fees make it worse. A fund charging 1.5% a year versus one charging 0.6% can leave you with around 20% less at retirement on the same contributions. There is also the issue of multiple super accounts. Around 3 million Australians still have more than one super fund open, often left behind from old jobs. Each of those accounts charges its own fees, its own insurance premiums, and its own admin costs. Consolidating into one well-performing fund can save thousands of dollars every year, and the process now takes about 5 minutes through the ATO portal linked to your myGov account. The third cost has almost nothing to do with numbers and everything to do with what happens inside your head. When you do not understand how markets move, every downturn feels like the end of the world. Panic sets in. Positions get sold at the worst possible moment. Losses get locked in that would have recovered if the money had simply been left alone. Markets go up over long periods of time, they wobble a lot along the way, and the people who stay in the game are usually the ones who come out ahead. Once that is understood, a 20% drop starts to look less like a disaster and more like an opportunity to buy at a discount. Now, here is something even more uncomfortable. Household debt in Australia has climbed past $2.2 trillion, sitting at record highs. The average mortgage is bigger than it has ever been. The RBA cash rate has been sitting at 4.35%, with the next decision due on the 11th of August 2026. And even with changes on the horizon, borrowing costs are still putting real pressure on a lot of families. If you do not understand how interest rates move through the economy, through your home loan, through the share market, and through your own job security, you are basically driving through fog with no headlights on. Understanding your mortgage is part of the same picture. On a $600,000 loan at 6% over 30 years, an extra $200 a month cuts almost 6 years off the loan and saves around $130,000 in interest. The gap between Australians who build wealth and Australians who spend their whole lives struggling is almost never about how much they earn. It comes down to what they know. A low-cost index fund tracking the ASX 200 or a broader global market gives you exposure to hundreds of companies at once, with management fees often under 0.20% a year. Compare that to actively managed funds that charge 1 to 2%, where more than 80% underperform the index over a 15-year period according to the S&P SPIVA report. Dollar cost averaging matters too. Putting a fixed amount into the market every month, regardless of what the news is doing, removes the guesswork of timing and smooths out the ride. The tax side is where most Australians leave money on the table. Salary sacrificing into super is taxed at 15% instead of your marginal rate, which for someone earning $90,000 is a 17% tax saving on every dollar redirected. Franking credits on Australian shares can also reduce or eliminate tax on dividends, which is a benefit unique to this country and one that most investors overseas do not get to use. Put all of this together and the picture becomes clear. Wealth in Australia is built through low fees, consistent contributions, smart use of the tax system, time in the market, and debt that works with you rather than against you. Before this video ends, there is one action worth taking today. Log into your super account. Check which investment option the balance is sitting in. Check the annual fee percentage. Check the 10-year return of that option against the median growth fund average of around 8% a year. From there, look at your emergency savings. Anything beyond 3 to 6 months of expenses sitting in a low-interest account is money that could be working harder somewhere else. Then look at your debt. If the interest rate on a loan is higher than the expected return from investing, paying it down faster is often the better move. If you got value from this, do me a favor and hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you there.